It is almost a truism today that great design is an important factor for great products. Historically, the software industry hasn't really had not really put much emphasis on early stages of the design process. And that's really not unusual for a young technology business where really the fascination with feasibility is often the driver for products and, well, let's be honest, a certain geekiness as a driver for design. And this lack of upfront investment in product design has a lot of cost. It causes us to often rework products very late in the design cycle or very late in the development cycle, I should say. And it certainly causes a lot of missed opportunities and suboptimal products or products that basically don't fulfill the needs or the wants of our customers. In order to create great design, certainly a great process helps a lot. And especially, I think that it's very helpful to have ways to effectively explore, communicate, and evaluate design ideas fast and efficiently. Sketching and in later stages of the design process, prototyping are wonderful techniques to explore a multitude of ideas without excessive investment and without excessive commitment in the early stages of the process. On the other hand, software is very complicated in the sense especially that it gets very highly dynamic, and especially over the last year, the degree of dynamic interaction in software has grown quite a lot, and the demands of our users have grown a lot. And it is very difficult to meaningfully sketch dynamic interactivity with traditional design tools. Why is that the case? I think there are a number of reasons. One of these reasons is that there's inherent tension between the freeformness and the informality of sketching and the requirements of structure that you have in order to create things like animation, things like interactivity. This phenomenon is not at all unique to interaction design. You have the same problem in 3D animation or in motion graphics or even in music composition. So there's always this tension between informality, improvisation, sketching in all its forms, and real production or real creation of complex interaction or animation or things like that. This is a hard problem, but I believe tools can definitely overcome that. A second problem is that many of the design tools that we are using today have really been conceived for production purposes. That is, they are meant to create final assets, to create, precision, quality, polished assets, rather than, like quick, informal sketches. And finally, we are in a world where we're slowly transitioning from an idea that user interaction is basically a static screenshot with a thin layer of interactivity on top, to a world where motion and interactivity is a much more integrated and dynamic process that really pervades the whole user experience from the start to the end. So in the Expression team, our mission is to help you create great user experiences. And we very much believe that to do that, we need to help you from the first moment of design on. We need to help you from the early stages of conceptual design on. And Sketchflow is our first step in that journey to create tools that help you and guide you through the design process from the very first step on to final production. Sketchflow is informal and quick, and it enables you to sketch out plentiful ideas for dynamic interaction in a cost-effective manner. Sketchflow also supports the idea of evolution of a rough sketch of your design and to evolve it into a living and breathing prototype that can be as real as it needs to be for you to convey your idea, your inspiration, your point. Sketchflow is going to be part of the next release of Expression Blend, and we have today already talked quite a bit about many of the features in Blend 3. And in this particular session, I'm going to focus very much on Sketchflow, but I'm also going to touch on several of the other features, simply because many of the other features in Blend 3 really help and contribute to the value of prototyping, even if they are not specifically made for that. Behavior is one great example for that, or sample data. So I forgot to continue with my slides. We talked about that already. So Sketchflow fundamentally tries to address 3 pain points in prototyping. One is to enable you to quickly experiment with dynamic user experiences in the first place. The second one is to communicate your design intent to other stakeholders in the process. And the third one, to make it easier to gather, evaluate, and use stakeholder feedback. I personally believe that the second 2 points, communication and feedback gathering, are probably quite a bit underappreciated in the whole process of prototyping. Creating prototypes, sketching are interactive, are collaborative, and group activities. Software design is a multidisciplinary activity, so the ability to communicate a design idea is very, very important. And after all, it's not just about me as a designer to communicate a design to you, but it is also about you providing feedback to me in a design process. So, and then there is another point, another goal. We really want to provide immediate business value. Many of us, when we create design, do that at a time when we really are not paid for the initial stages of the design. We have to answer to an RFP, or in a corporate setting, we have a product proposal that hasn't been approved yet. So it is very, very important to be able to quickly create compelling prototypes that can advertise an idea, that can make people excited about an idea, that can advertise what we want to do in an effective manner. And being cost effective there is an immediate business value add that is important to have. Now, I don't really want to talk more about SketchFlow. I rather want to demo it. So at this point, I'm going to stop slides and move over to a demo. So what you see on the screen is Blend running SketchFlow. And the first thing I want to do is, Blend has a lot of UI and a lot of tools and panels that allow you to do all kinds of very sophisticated things in a production workflow. But really in a prototyping scenario, we need very, very little of that. So we have a workspace management feature in Blend 3 that basically allows me to configure my workspaces. And for this demo, for most of the time of it at least, I'm going to just hide pretty much all of the UI of Blend because we really don't need it. Prototyping, sketching needs to be fast and informal, so the less UI we have getting in the way, the better, the easier it is to use. So SketchFlow basically, if you are in a SketchFlow project, you basically have this new view at the bottom of the screen. That is the application flow panel. The application flow allows you to model the flow, navigation, and composition of an application in a very visual manner. Basically, each of these little nodes that you see here on the screen, or actually in this panel, are screens. And you can think of these screens as little whiteboards that in an early stage of your prototype, you can just scribble on or put Post-its on or sketch on. You can just use them to quickly create content as informally as on a whiteboard. Let's actually wire up this flow a little bit and build this application. We're going to build a little snowboard shopping application here. And I have created a few notes in advance just because I don't want to spend all my time drawing things. But there's a lot we're still going to add. So from my start screen, I'm going to start creating a welcome screen. So let's name that welcome. And from this welcome screen, this will actually also become my main menu. I want to navigate to a boards page where I can shop for boards. I want to navigate to a boots page where I can shop for boots. And I'm going to create a new one that I don't have yet here that I'm going to use to shop for bindings. From here, I also want to be able, from all these 3 shopping pages, to go and review my shopping cart. So I can just wire that up by dragging these things over. And from the review cart to a checkout. Very easy, very quick to just create, like a flow diagram that shows how the structure of your app is supposed to work. I also want to have a community page. Let me wire that up as well. And that is pretty much the structure of the app I want to work with for today. Now, currently, I don't really have any content on these whiteboards. So let's start adding some content. And, oops, I can do that in the most informal way, by just sketching. So as we're doing snowboards, let me sketch out a couple of mountains here. And add a few slopes, just so that I have something. Let's quickly add a Post-it on the screen, just to basically type a note what this is. This is a prototype for a snowboard shopping site. And let's add a title. Just with drag and drop. Snowboard online, here we go. So very simple, just simple sketching tools, very, very quick to set up things. Obviously, we also often will use images in our design. So in this case, I created actually an image that I wanted to use that was just sketched on a piece of paper and scanned. I want to use that on my site, not a problem. I just bring it in and use it as a rough page. Let's go to our welcome screen. I don't quite know exactly what my welcome screen is going to be. So I also want to put a title up here and say this is going to be my welcome screen. And I think I might want to have eventually a little menu here that allows me to navigate through my site. And I also created a little background image here that I want to put. I just put that on top of my title, which wasn't quite what I wanted. Here you go. So eventually, as we're building UI, I probably want to use some controls at some point and start, like drawing with real controls. And of course, in Blend, given that it's a UI building tool, we have lots of controls. We have access to all the Silverlight and WPF controls that you want, and you can just draw these things, like right on the screen. So, for example, I could use buttons, or I could use radio buttons, or anything that is in the palette of controls or that you can buy as a third-party controls. But as you're sketching out a prototype, this is probably not quite the look that you want. These controls really have no sketchiness to it. It's totally the wrong look. And quite frankly, if you use a hi-fi look too early in a prototype, what is happening is that people will look at the rendering of your controls and complain about that rather than looking at actually the concept of your site. So you really would like to maintain a sketch look of the things that you're doing. And because we recognize that, we basically provide a whole set of sketch styles for all the important controls, actually for all the controls in Silverlight and WPF that allow you to preserve basically a consistent vocabulary, like of a good look, of a good sketch look for the product and for the prototype that you're building. So here you see, for example, a wiggly button, a wiggly text box, sliders, scroll viewers, this little post-it and so on. We also ship Sketchflow with 2 fonts that are specifically made for prototyping. The font that you see here is called Buxton Sketch, named after Bill Buxton. And you might have seen it in his keynote. And the second font, you see it down here, is an architectural sketch font called Sketchflow Print. And as I said, both of these fonts are going to be part of Blend, and you can use these fonts as part of your project. So let's get rid of all these controls that I was drawing here. I don't actually need these. And what are we now going to do with this page now that we have created this structure of our site? Well, really, we would like to try it out and see how it feels. And that's really easy to do because in Sketchflow, from the very first moment on, your prototypes are real WPF and Silverlight applications. That means you can just run them just like any other applications. So I go to the project menu and I hit Run Project. I could also just hit the F5 key and your prototype will run. It's currently building and here it is. So let me just get rid of Blend for a second and just look at the prototype as it's running. So when we run a prototype for the first time or any time during prototyping, because your prototype in the early phases might just be a bunch of rough sketches, just a set of storyboards, it might not have any UI, we're providing a little player frame around this prototype so that you can navigate through it. Because what you really want to do is you want to explore your prototype and make sure that it actually works, that it has the feel and the flow that you want. So up here in the upper left corner, you get this navigation UI that allows you to navigate through your prototype. So for example, from the start page, I can go to my welcome screen. And from the welcome screen, I have bindings, boards, boots, community. And I can also see that by basically bringing up the flow view. Let me make that big and put it as an overlay. So here's the welcome screen, and you can see I can navigate to community, I can navigate to boards, boots, bindings, and so on. And all these things appear here as commands so that I can basically navigate without having any UI. That is very, very important because, as I said, it enables you to take a rough storyboard, a rough sketch, without having to think about what exactly your UI is. You can still navigate through the application and interact with it and try out how the flow feels of the whole thing. So I am looking at the wrong notes. That is not a good idea. So another thing that is really, really important as you are prototyping is collecting feedback. I said earlier that feedback collection is one of the essential things in a prototyping life cycle, and the Sketchflow player also has a lot of capabilities for that. So if I switch here to my feedback pane, let's actually go to a different page, for example. Oops, shame on me. Let me get rid of that. If I go back to this page, basically, I have the ability to create feedback simply by inking. So I can create an ink tool, and just start making notes here and saying, hey, I don't actually know what this is for, and I really would like to see a list of snowbirds here, and I can just type things. Oops, if I could type. I really would like to see a list of snowboards here. And I can save this feedback and send it back to the designer in Blend. So let's do that, actually. Let me go and save this feedback. You may have just seen this little dialog that asked me for my author information and my initials. We're capturing this information. If you, for example, have Word installed, we get this information from Office, or otherwise we use the Windows login. Of course, you can just also type in your own. So let me save this feedback. And as I go back to Blend, I can now navigate to this. Actually, I don't need to navigate anyway. I can just bring up my feedback window and load this feedback file into Blend. So let's find it. I open it here, and I can switch this on as an overlay. And if I now go to the same page, this feedback appears as an overlay right on the design surface. So you as a designer can collect feedback files from as many, reviewers or from as many collaborators you have, from as many of your stakeholders as you have. You can have them send back these files, display them on the design surface, and see their feedback in context of your design and immediately react to it, which is really, really useful to do. Also, I should mention that the Sketchflow player is actually not part of Blend. It is part of your prototype. So whenever we create a Sketchflow project, we inject this player into your prototype project, and it basically becomes part of the prototype and is redistributable. So if you create a Silverlight prototype, then your prototype just becomes a web application, and you can just put the whole prototype, including the player, on the website just like you would any other Silverlight applications, and your stakeholders have access to it via the web. If it is a WPF prototype project, you can just take this prototype and distribute it as an archive. So it's very, very easy to do that, and to have as many people as you like, use the prototype and send feedback back to you as a designer. So I should mention at this point, because this question comes up once in a while, everything we are doing in Blend 3 is equally applicable to Silverlight and WPF development. So we're basically supporting both platforms in the same way, and pretty much all the features in Blend are accessible from both Silverlight and WPF. So no matter which type of project you do, we support it fully. Obviously, there are a few differences in features between WPF and Silverlight. So for example, real 3D with full 3D objects is only available in WPF, and perspective 3D is only available in Silverlight 3. So we only support that in the corresponding project type. But otherwise, anything that we can possibly support is always supported across both platforms. So for now, let's get rid of this feedback, and let's look how we can continue to evolve this prototype. So first of all, I want to go back to my welcome screen, and I want to create a little menu component here. So I'm just going to go to my drawing tool and find myself a little rectangle that I want to draw here. And let's make this rectangle a little filled. I'm going to make it red for a second just so that it's more obvious what I'm doing. We will get a more reasonable color in a moment. And I want to have, let me move that down a little bit like this. Let's add a few buttons for that for the menu. So again, pick just some wiggly buttons here, and let's just copy that a few times. I can just hold down alternate key and just copy things very quickly. So I just need these 4 menu commands, and let's just give these different names. So the first one I call boards. The second one I call boots. The third one I call bindings, and the fourth one community. Oops, that one is a little bit too short. Make it longer. Okay, so now I have this menu, and I realize, I really would like this menu also on all the other pages. I really would like to see the same menu on the boards page, on the boots page, on the bindings page. So really the thing should be a component that I can reuse. So nothing easier than that. I can just use my object in timeline and select all this menu component and just go here and say make into composition screen. Let's call this composition screen menu. And here it is. So what now has happened is that Sketchflow has taken these elements from this page and made it into a reusable component and has created a different type of node, a component node here on the screen, and connected it with a dotted line, which means this component is now used on the other page. So if you look here at the object tree, all these elements that I had here before have now been collapsed into this single menu. And if I now want to reuse this thing on another screen, it's as simple as just dragging it over, for example, to the board screen. And it appeared here, and I can just drag it into the position where I want it to be. Here it is. And so your flow graph now represents the composition of your application just in the same way as it represents the flow. And in many cases, when you think about the design of an application, that is a real important thing to do, because the structure of an application often is not at the granularity, like of screens, but it's at a much finer granularity. And being able to think and sketch out the structure of components is just incredibly useful when you're thinking about application design. So let's actually go back to this component and change this very beautiful red that we have here into something more sensible. So let's make that gray and make it a little bit transparent, just for the fun of it. And if we now go back to the pages, you see that the component has updated, and it also has updated here. So very, very easy to create reusable building blocks that you can use all across your application. So another thing that you probably want to do very, very quickly as your prototype evolves is to illustrate to people how you would actually interact with the user interface that you're building. After all, building interactivity is really what this is all about. And in order to do that, Blend has very extensive animation features that help you in early stages of a prototype to do things like that very efficiently. So let me quickly navigate here to a page where I have actually prepared something like that. So in this example, the designer who created this has actually made an animation, and this animation shows how I would interact with this list of boots down here. So I can play this animation just like I can navigate in my player UI. I can also start animations. So let me run this particular animation. So you see this is not me, this mouse that moves down there, that is part of the animation. So you see how you would drag something into the shopping cart, and you see how this ad would come out just to give you feedback. So animation is a very, very important feature to cost effectively and with a lot of impact illustrate your design intent as you are building prototypes. So in Sketchflow, we manage animation through a feature called states, and states have a lot of other uses as well. So states can be used, for one thing, to manage design alternatives. Let's say you as a designer create 3 or 4 different variants of a particular screen, and you would like to show these in a presentation to a client. In the same way as I've been starting this animation here, I could switch between different design alternatives for a given screen without having to have all this in a much more complicated flow. Another thing that you can do is animations, as we just seen. And the third thing, and probably the most universal one, is to actually represent the different states of your application. Because, let's face it, most application screens have many different states that you might be in. So let me illustrate that in an example. Let's go here to our binding screen, which is currently very, very, very empty. And let's first give it a title. And let's call that, bindings, and move it up here in the corner. Now let's also get our menu back here. So here it goes, already at the right spot, fine. And now let's just quickly mock up a very, very, very simple screen. And I'm doing this as simple as it can possibly be, because after all, this is about quick mock-ups. So this is my shopping page. And I want to have two buttons on here. Button here. And one of these buttons will sit here and will have the beautiful title View Cart. Oops, sorry. Let's actually make that a two-liner. And let's copy this button and move it down here. And we call it Live Chat. Again, two-liner. Okay. So what I want to happen now is when I press these buttons, I want to have a pop-up appear that basically shows me how my shopping cart looks like currently, or I want to have a live chat so that I can communicate with a sales representative. So how do I do these things? Well, let's use states. So first of all, now it's time to actually go back to a workspace where I have a little bit more of the Blend user interface available. So here I have my states pane, and in the states pane I can on the fly declare the number of states or the types of states I want on my page. So states can be organized in states groups because many times you have multiple orthogonal sets of states. For example, I could have the bindings page in one state for being logged in and another state when being logged out. And this is completely orthogonal to showing the pop-ups or not showing the pop-ups. And it's very important to be able to manage many of these state groups at the same time. In this case, I'm just creating one that I'm calling pop-ups, very simple, and I create a state that's called none, where I see nothing, and one state where I say cart. So in the cart state, I now want to see my cart, so let's create one. So I just go here, and I just draw out the way how my cart wants to look. This is currently transparent, that's probably not good. Let's do it that way. And I really don't care for this demonstration what is actually on this cart. So I'm just quickly creating a post-it and say, this will be the shopping cart. Okay, good enough. So now I want to do the same thing, and I want to have another state to show the live chat. So all I need to do is create another state and call it chat. So do exactly the same exercise again, just pick a drawing tool, and I'll draw out a container, give it a color. This time, let's make it slightly green, just so that it looks a little different. Let's add a post-it and call it chat with a sales rep. Okay, so now I have these two states, and I can now very, very easily switch between all these states that I have done. None shows nothing, and I can bring up the pop-up and remove it. So very simple to do. Now, what I also would like to have is I would like to have nice transitions for these pop-ups to come up. I don't just want them to jump at me. I really would like to have a smooth transition for them to fade in. And that's really easy to do. You see here this transition thing. It says default transition duration. I can just dial up a transition length here, and Blend will automatically generate a transition. Now, there are tons of options to create transitions with much more control. You can create transitions manually, use all kind of animation features that you want. But in many cases, these very, very quick transitions that you do that way are really so fast, and especially in prototyping, that they really do the job very well. Now, I would like to do one improvement here, though. I want my pop-ups to come in rather slowly, but I would like them to go out very, very quickly. And so I can go and say here, when I go from my cart to nothing, so when the cart goes away, make this transition just a whole lot faster. And I do the same for my chat. When I go from chat to none, I want to make it faster. So you can see that while I can specify a default transition duration, I can actually pick specific transitions and give different timing to these transitions, which is very, very effective and makes it very fast for you to just quickly mock up something that has the right feel and has the right transitions. So let me run this and let's see how that looks like. So here's our site. We navigate to the bindings page, and you see there's nothing coming up here. I can go to my card, click on that, and you see this thing coming up. I can go to the chat, and I have this coming up. Or I can say none, and you see that vanishes quickly. One thing that is worth mentioning about the transitioning system in Blend is that transitions are interruptible. That is, if you interrupt a transition in the middle, it will not jump to the beginning state of it and then run from there, but it will pick up its state from exactly where it is. So transitions are much smoother than they are typically in other UI platforms. So for example, if I run this card transition and I fire, I clicked, and I fire the other one, you see that it actually smoothly picks up where it is at that point, so it doesn't jump first to the other state, which is really, really useful. So I see it's very, very easy to wire up states and to create like transitions that just do these animations. Again, to show and to illustrate what type of interaction you would have in your UI as you build things out. So far, we have done all the interaction with our prototype, basically using these training wheels we have over here. Like we have always used these buttons, and wouldn't it be nice if I could actually use all these buttons and things that I have here, the actual controls? And in fact, it's really, really easy to do that. You can absolutely do that. So let me first move back to my simple workspace and just switch off, go back to my normal state. So in order to wire up interactivity, it's extremely simple. So for example, I would like to wire up these menu buttons that I have in my navigation menu. I can just click on that, right-click on it, and say navigate to, and just pick the page I want to navigate to. So from the boards button, I obviously want to navigate to the boards page. From the boots button, I just want to navigate to the boots screen. From bindings, I want to navigate to bindings. And finally, from community, navigate to community. So really, really easy to wire these things up. It's just as easy to wire up state changes. So for example, I want this button to fire the state change. So I say activate state, bindings, card. I wire up this one and say activate state, bindings, chat. And now I also want these things to vanish. So I click on my card and I say, hey, when I click on the card, activate state, none. And I do exactly the same thing for the chat. I click on this and I say, activate state, none. So let's run this again. So we didn't put any UI on our start screen, so I still need to navigate here. But now here we have this menu, and this menu now works. So I can click on that and I go to my board screen. I can click here and I go to my boot screen. Oops, I didn't put any UI here to go back, so let's go here. Now I go to my binding screen, I navigate here, I click the view card button and the transition fires. I click here, this transition fires. I click here, it vanishes. So very, very easy, very, very quick to wire up interactivity, to do state changes, to do navigation and all these things to make your prototype a little bit more real. So at this point, it's probably worth talking a little bit about design process and design documentation. So at any point in time, as you are making a prototype, Sketchflow allows you to create design documentation. You can just go to the File menu and say, Export to Microsoft Word. And let me give that a different name. OK. And what Sketchflow now does is it creates a Word document from your prototype. So you can see it there, process all the screens. And when it is done with that, it will open Word and show us the document that it has created. So this document that we get has as a title the title of the project that we are currently working on. has the date, and it creates a table of content where every screen that you have in your application is an entry in the table of contents. And every state that you have, for example, here you see the binding page, you see all the different states, and then you get a table of figures and all these things. So next thing you see is you get the application flow, so you see how the structure of your application looks like. You see the dotted lines that show you the composition connections and all these pieces. And as you go through that, you see all the different screens. So here's the start screen, here's the checkout screen, and so on and so on. Let's find the states that we just created. Scrub. So here they are. So here's the bindings page in the state none. Here's the same page in the state card and the same page in the state chat. So very, very quick to create, like a usable design documentation that you can use to actually, write specs or hand it off to your client for redlining or whatever else you want to do with the documentation. So a very, very powerful feature to work with that. So far, what we have seen and what we have done is we have very, very quickly sketched out the structure of a site. We have created components on the fly by just drawing some content and converting that content in a component. We have used a wide variety of drawing tools, to sketch out content and to create content on our pages. We then have used animation and states to actually simulate simple interactivity, and we have wired all that up in the player so that we could actually see it and interact with it from the very first moment on. So again, I want to stress that as you're building prototypes with Sketchflow, you can really try and play with your prototypes from the very first moment on. You can review the results and send it back to the designer to get feedback on whatever you do. That's very, very powerful. Now, as you continue with your prototypes, one of the very fascinating things about Sketchflow is that the projects you are working on are real WPF and Silverlight projects, and you can continue evolving them and make them more real and more interactive and more valid prototypes without any limits. And I want to continue showing you that with a couple of more things that I want to do here. So in my little review comment that I was making here, let's bring that up again. Let me get my feedback window back up again. We were saying it would be really, really nice if we had some, if we had a list of snowboards here on our site. So, well, let's do that. Let me first again get rid. Sorry, I want to switch off the feedback again, that it's not in my way. In most prototyping tools, what I would have to do in order to see a picture of the list, I would just have to draw a list. But the problem when I draw a list is that I really can't interact with it, which is not that much fun. So in Sketchflow, I can actually create things with data that I can actually really use and really play with. And the feature that is really, really nice for that is called sample data. Sample data allows you to mock up a data source on the fly, fill it with random data that represents the things you want to play with, and then use it for data-driven UI. Blend has always had very, very strong data-bound UI capabilities, but in the past they always required that you had a pre-created data source. And in an early-stage design process, you typically don't have that. You may not even know yet which data you actually want. So at a certain point, you may just know, oh, well, let me mock that up and let me see how it works, and then you may change it on the fly as you go. So in this case, I have already quickly mocked up a sample data source, and it's really, really easy to do. All you have to do is to basically add new fields here. So for example, if I want to have a new column here, I can say something, I don't know, whatever. Let's call it website. Website. So I can just add a new column to this database on the fly. And then I can open my configuration UI that allows me to configure this, this data set. So columns can have different types. For example, the column that you see here is an image column. And all you do with these is you point them at a directory, and Blend will just pick up the images in there and use them to generate sample data sets. For text columns, we have a wide variety of configurations options. So, for example, text columns can, like just be dummy text, lorem ipsum text, or you can have names, things that look like phone numbers and so on. Let's change this name column for a second to a phone number. So you see, as soon as I do that, Blend basically generates a list of phone numbers. Or I want something that looks like an address. So we create things that look like an address. So it's very, very easy to, let's go back to names. It's very, very easy to create something that actually represents, meaningful data that you can work with. Or here for my website column, let's just change that into a website URL. So when you do lorem ipsum text, you have also the ability to say how many words do you want, how long are the words. So it's really, really easy to actually mock up data in a meaningful way. So once I have done that, I can basically go and just drag this whole data set and just dump it here on any place inside of the UI. And what Blend will do in that moment is it will basically create a list box that is data bound to this sample data box. So really, really easy, just with drag and drop. And what it does is, by default, it basically creates here what we call a data template that defines how this data is actually represented visually. So if you look at the things that you see in here, is they represent actually exactly the content of each of the columns. So it's the description, then the image, then the name, then the price, and then the text. So I can now go in Blend, select this list box, and use Blend's data styling features to actually change the look of that. So I can go here and edit template, and now I can just change one of these things, and you see that all the others here at the bottom also follow. So for example, in this case, I really only want to show the name and the picture, and see that they all are like that, and I can go and resize that. So okay, that probably makes more sense. And now I want to go and just give the whole thing a little bit more margin. Let's add a little bit more spacing here. So really, really easy to lay out your data in the way you want in a very, very visual manner so that you as a designer can actually see how that looks and what you're doing. So very, very powerful. The next thing that I want to do, we somehow lost our menu component here. I don't know how that happened. Let me recreate that. Oh, you see what I just did? I accidentally added the menu component into the data template, so it's now replicated in every item. That was probably not what I wanted. Let's go out of here again, and let's do that again. So here we go. I don't know why we lost that. I must have pressed delete accidentally. So now we have our list box here. We have data in there that makes sense. But we really would like to have a little bit more interactivity. We would like to be able to actually drag and drop items from this list box into our details pane and into our cart. And this is where behaviors come in. Behaviors are basically packaged, reusable building blocks of interactivity. We're going to ship Blend with a whole set of standard generic behaviors that will be applicable for many, many scenarios. But it's very, very important to realize that behaviors are highly extensible. And basically any shop will be able to create their own vocabulary of interactivity by just creating new behaviors that do the type of interaction or that fulfill the interaction patterns that you want to design. And the nice thing with behaviors is that they really allow you to create reusable interactivity in a way that allows designers to create production quality interactivity without having to write code. And that's a real, real neat thing. For developers, they are cool because, again, they allow developers to package interactivity in a way that designers can actually take advantage of, and where you get a degree of reusability that you generally don't have, because behaviors are able to encapsulate things that traditionally would need multiple event handlers and would be really difficult to write in a reusable manner. So let me use a behavior here. I want to drag something. I want to be able to drag items from this list box into these other fields. So I'm going to use a drag-drop item behavior and just dump it on this list box. And that's really all I need to do in order for this to work. Many behaviors have all kind of configuration options that allow you to configure how the behavior actually works. But the drag-drop item behavior is really simple. It knows really what to do. Now, I also want to wire up this checkout button and say that when you press the checkout button, I really would like to go to my review cart page. And this is exactly the same thing that I did earlier with the menu buttons on the menu, and I just do that here again because I want to make one point. Sketchflow internally is actually using behaviors for that. So the navigation between screens and the activation of states is just a behavior, just in the same way as the drag drop item was. It is just basically a shortcut that we have in the user interface because navigation and activation of states is so frequent, you do that so often that basically we added these menu entries here that allow you to do that much quicker. So let's run that and let's see what that actually does. So let's navigate to our boards page. Let's switch off the feedback. So first of all, I now have here a real working list box. So it does everything that a list box would do. I can select things, I can use keyboard navigation. It's a real working list box. But because I have applied this behavior, I can now also drag an item and drop it here, and I actually get this interactivity to work. Now you may ask yourself, why does that show up here in this different look? How does Blend know which look to use? Well, before making this page, I actually created a data template similar, using exactly the same technique that I used earlier to create the data template for the list. And I made a data template for this details area that tells Blend, okay, this is how you want these things to be laid out and the data to look. So that's the power of data templating. It's very, very easy to create a whole set of templates for different looks you want for a piece of data and then create things like that. The same thing if I drag over here into the card. We're doing exactly the same thing. It's also just a list box, but again, it's a slightly different data template. Instead of showing a picture and the name, we're showing a picture, a price, and a remove button. Very, very easy to build data templates that allow you to interact with your data in a very meaningful way. And with behaviors, it's very, very easy to give your prototypes complex interactive behaviors that traditionally you would have to code without writing code. Just to give you a few examples, and unfortunately I won't have time in this demo today to actually show you that in all detail, but we have of course written really simple behaviors like navigation in states and changing properties and things like that. But we've also written things, we have played around with taking an open source physics engine and wrapping that in behaviors so that you can basically create physics-based user interfaces without writing a single line of code, which is actually very, very cool. I've showed that in the earlier session on Blend 3 in an overview. And maybe, I think, maybe I have time and I can show it to you later in a second. So there are all kind of fun things that you can do with behaviors, and it's really something where only your imagination is the limit. And we are going to have on the expression gallery that we just opened on the expression website, there is actually a space for people, community space for people to publish behaviors. And we hope that we'll see a nice ecosystem of these things coming up because they are really, really easy to write and they are really, really useful. Okay. So I wanted to show one other thing that is often very important. In the workflow of design and design agencies, clearly, probably most of you are working with Photoshop in one capacity or the other. So Blend 3 makes it very, very easy for you to take assets from Photoshop and to integrate in a workflow where you create lots of design assets in Photoshop, and you can use these in all kind of very flexible manners. Let me just create a new screen here just so that we don't, oops, that was not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. And just import something from Photoshop. So as you go here, you can basically pick any Photoshop file and just select it. And we're getting into our Photoshop importer. The Photoshop importer basically gives you a list of all the layers in the Photoshop file. And for example, this here is an image layer, so you can see this as an image. But these layers here are much more interesting. This is actually a bitmap layer with a vector mask. And so we're capturing vector masks appropriately as well. There are also text layers, so here we have a text layer. And let me go back for a second to this vector layer. So on a vector layer, you get these options. You can either import it as a vector path or that is fully editable inside of Blend, or you can import it as a flattened bitmap. For text, you have exactly the same option. You can either import it as editable text or as a flattened bitmap. So that's very, very powerful because it allows you to use your design assets very, very quickly. And here you go, the whole thing in Blend. And just to prove to you that this is actually real Photoshop thing, let me make this whole thing look a little bit more dynamic. So I can take this vector shape, re-edit it, can certainly do the same here with the snowflake. Not very pretty though. But more fun, let's zoom in here a little bit. Oops. Let's zoom in here a little bit and go to one of these text fields. So first of all, these text fields have taken their font settings exactly from the Photoshop file. So we have linked to that font, everything works. And I now have an editable text field that completely basically respects the font setting, font size, and all that coming from Photoshop. So it makes it very, very easy for you to take design elements from Photoshop and use them inside of a prototype or inside of a production application in Blend. And there are many things you can do with that. In the keynote, for example, you've seen John Harris actually use data binding, drag and drop data binding together with a Photoshop template. So in the same way, as I did data binding in a list box, I can easily use a Photoshop template and actually bind data to this text field, and it will preserve, like its font settings and all that stuff in exactly the same way as we've done that here. So that's a very, very powerful feature that integrates Blend very effectively in the overall design workflow. So let's say now you have evolved your prototype and your prototype has basically fulfilled its purpose. You got the job, or you have shown all your stakeholders exactly what your design idea is, what your design intent was, and people have understood it and like it. What do you do next? Well, Blend gives you a whole lot of possibilities what you can do with the prototype. There's a lot of flexibility. One thing that you can do is you can actually make a real app out of your prototype. Sometimes that is a good idea. Let's say you're building something that is a fairly simple application with a simple structure, where the structure of your prototype is very close to the structure of the application you would build anyway. For example, for many websites that might be the case, or for like wizard-style applications and these type of things. In this case, what you can do is you can basically just remove the Sketchflow player from your application, and the whole thing becomes a normal WPF or Silverlight navigation app. I have actually done that with this application, so let me just run that as an independent application. So this is exactly the same application that I had as a prototype, but it's now running inside of a standard WPF navigation frame. And for those of you who are a little bit familiar with that, that navigation frame can be taken by a developer and completely changed in look and feel, so you don't have to have this look here as it is up here. And I can now navigate through this application. Works exactly the same way as it worked in the prototype, and actually I get the back-forward navigation automatically through the WPF navigation frame thing. So it's absolutely possible to use a prototype and its structure as it is as a running application. This is possible because Sketchflow prototypes really are nothing but standard WPF, Silverlight, or Silverlight projects. So the same projects you can exchange and open in Visual Studio. So this is the project pane in Sketchflow, and you see there's really nothing special in here. Every screen is just a user control. The visual states we are using for states are just VSM visual states as available in Silverlight and WPF. Animations are just animations. Every asset you use is just a standard asset, and it can be reused in any shape or form you like, which is very, very nice. If you look at like some of the literature on prototyping and some of the things that people are talking about, there are many people who think that prototyping, in order to be effective, needs to use the technology that you're actually planning to deploy in, because otherwise you always get this radical break and you're not really prototyping the right things. You know what? In Blend, that is absolutely no problem. Our prototypes are very, very informal to start with, but they still are exactly the technology that you would deploy with WPF or Silverlight. Sometimes, however, converting your prototype is just simply the wrong thing. For example, I'm starting to use Sketchflow, of course, to prototype features for the next version of Blend and to try out ideas. Clearly, my prototypes that I built for that have a radically different structure than what anybody would really built in Blend. So I really use that just more for UI studies than for anything else. So in these cases, prototypes in Blend in Sketchflow are cheap. They are disposable. It's not a problem. You can very, very quickly create meaningful prototypes and throw them away when you're done. And actually, as Bill Buxton said in his keynote, one of the key properties of great properties is that they are disposable, that you don't get attached to them, that you don't have to get hung up on them if you have to throw them away later. And that is really easy to do just as well. And then, of course, there's the hybrid case. During prototyping, sometimes you create a lot of valuable assets. You may create animations, you may create visual assets, you may create styles, you may create components, user controls. All these things that you create, because everything in a Sketchflow project is just a standard Visual Studio project, you can reuse. So every screen is just a user control that you can take into any other project. Every user control you create, you can use. Every animation, every resource, everything you create is a reusable asset. So you can use as much as you need, but everything you do is cheap enough that you never have to actually worry if you need to throw something away. So this is really pretty much what I wanted to show you today. So just to summarize, let me go back for 1 second to my, by the way, this font here, as we're talking about the Sketchflow print font, this whole presentation was also made with that font. So that's one of the fonts that we're shipping. So let me get to my summary. So basically, Sketchflow is designed to make it much easier and faster for you to create, sketch, communicate, and review meaningful prototypes. Sketchflow is designed so that you can evolve rough sketches and storyboards that really need to have no actual user interface, that can be as simple and quick as they can possibly be, and to make them as real, to evolve them to become as real as you need in order to make the point that you want to make with your prototype. At the same time, your prototypes are always real applications, and that has a lot of very positive implications. One thing is you get access to every single feature that Blend has to build actual UI. You get real controls instead of just pictures of controls. You can play with data. You can play with all the powerful animation features that Blend has to quickly do mock-ups of user interfaces. You can use behaviors to build actual interactivity into a prototype without having to write code. You can use sample data to do data-driven UI. And most importantly, there's no technology break if you need more, because you still get world-class leading developer-designer integration if you need to get the step further and actually need to get a developer in to do this one thing that you don't happen to have a pre-written behavior for that you really would like to show in your prototype. So, and really one important thing for that is that in the end, because it is so much easier and faster to create design explorations, it's so much cheaper to create, RFPs or to respond to RFPs. And we basically believe that Sketchflow can very much help you to have a better return of investment on your design efforts and to create better business as a design agency or as a designer inside of a company. So really the other two elements is you can create design documentation, so you have great workflow integration, also with Adobe Creative Suite, so it fits into your existing workflow. We think there's a lot of value for you in designing with Sketchflow, and we hope you'll give it a spin once we make it available. Thank you very much.